oftentimes the guys that I was climbing with, I would see they would fail mentally. It's not like they were afraid or anything, but they would start off the climb by going, "Oh well, let me just give it a shot," or "Let me just give it a try." And giving it a try gives you the room for failure, allows you to excuse your failure. I'm just giving it a try, right? You want to get on and you want to say, "I'm going to do it," right? You want to say, "I'm going to send this thing right now." So the reason why you fail is not because you're failing mentally. If you fail, it might be conditions. It might be you grabbed the hold wrong. It might be that you're just not strong enough. It might be your beta's wrong. But you're not failing because you didn't believe in yourself.
Greg Lowe, welcome to the Testpiece podcast, man. How you doing?
Ah, I'm doing well, thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Greg, I gotta tell you, chatting with you on this podcast is kind of blowing my mind because I knew about you and saw you for the first time 30 years ago at Mortar Rock, and you were an absolute icon in the West Coast scene back when I first started climbing as like a 10-year-old. And yeah, that's back in the 90s. And so, yeah, man, just
Wow,
such a
10
trip
years
for me.
old.
Yeah. I don't, that let's not do the math on how old that makes me now or how old that makes you, but been doing it for a while, and I just never would have predicted getting to chat with you about climbing decades later. So, yeah, man, thanks for coming on with me.
No, of course, and thanks for the invite. I mean, it's not too often I get to talk about climbing nowadays, and it's kind of fun. It's certainly fun to kind of delve back into the days when I first started, and just to see the progress that climbing has made since then. Going from a sport where only kind of weird fringe people climbed,
What are you
and
trying to
usually
say,
people
Greg?
had mental issues, to now it's so mainstream, right?
Yeah, well, let's give everyone a little bit of context here who may not have heard your name, although shame on you if you don't know your history and know about Greg. But you were an early pioneer in bouldering. You were hooked on bouldering before anyone thought it was cool. You took that and became a prolific developer. I'm going to say all over the West Coast, but my hunch is that you did some developing all over the world because I know you spent a lot of time in Font. And you competed in Europe at the X Games. People probably don't even remember that climbing was in the X Games. You even won nationals twice for speed climbing. And
Yep.
Yeah, and the other thing I thought this was just really cool is when you worked at 510, or you worked at 510 in the early years, and you
Yes.
helped create the
Yes.
very first Dragons, which were some of the early shoes that were downturned and made specifically to heel hook. So yeah, I'm sure I missed a million things, but anything else that I should have put in that intro there, Greg?
Um, I mean that's pretty close to a decent synopsis. I would say one of the things that more than anything, more than my climbing, I would say that people bring up about what I've done in the past is my spotting,
Mm.
is the spotting I've done for people, and uh, and yeah, I've done a lot of spotting. I used to have friends who would call me up and say, "Hey, Greg, can you come up to Yosemite this weekend? I want to do X, Y, or Z," or um, I would be in Fontainebleau and people would be like, "I heard you're in town, can you?" Or "I heard you in the area, can you come out to such and such climb?" And I would do that.
Well, I think it's important to note that you are on the bigger side of climbers. You're taller. You were buff. You are buff still, and I think that goes hand in hand with spotting. Is there any specific whose ankles did you save off of some famous climb? You got any stories on famous spots?
Um, I don't know. I've saved a bunch of people. What's interesting is I've done it enough that I forget, and so occasionally I'll see people that I haven't seen in years, and they're like, "Remember that time when you caught me off the thing and I didn't even hit the ground?" I'm like, "No, I don't remember that at all." But that's cool. That's cool. I would say, actually, I have a story about. So years ago, I used to climb in Yosemite, and there's a guy by the name of Jim Thornburg who's a famous photographer, and I think he's still working, he's still out there, and he actually is the one who started me climbing. So in 1988, I took a class. Well, I was in high school. I took a class through Cal Adventures. This was in Berkeley, California. This was at the university. Sorry, I was in high school, but the class was at the university, and he happened to be teaching the class. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like this guy's amazing. Just watching the way he moves. But kind of fast forward to about 7 or 8 years later, we were in Yosemite, and he was on Midnight Lightning, trying Midnight Lightning, and he did the move to the lightning bolt. I'm going to assume that people know the climb. He did the move to the lightning bolt. He matched, and people kind of had all the pads set up on the slab, and mainly where the mantle is, and only one or two where the lightning bolt, because we weren't really falling there. And he was setting up. He was kind of readjusting his fingers, and both hands blew off, and he came off the wall looking like one of those Olympic swimmers who's doing the backstroke start, and he just launched backwards, and I was a little too close when I was spotting him, and I had to reach over my head and catch him like a football and pull him back into my lap, and then we ended up landing on the other side of the slab with him on top of me. And I know he was quite shocked by that. And then I immediately went around the corner, and so yeah, you're right. I'm on the bigger side, and my strongest climbing weight. I tried different weights, and my weight can fluctuate quite a bit, but my strongest climbing weight was about 175 pounds, and I was probably somewhere in that neighborhood, 175, 180 pounds. And I had this friend that I had met, who was the only one of the few guys that I knew that was bigger than I was, and his nickname was Gigantor, in fact. And he was around the corner on one of the easier climbs, and he had gone off route. Um, and he was really high on the left hand side, and he he was pulling over on the mantle and fell off, and his shoes, I was wearing a tank top, and his shoes hit me in the chest and ripped down my chest over my nipples, popped the seams on my tank top, ripped all the way down to my stomach, and then landed on top of me. And Ron Kalk happened to be there with a camera, and he had just, because I guess the guy was topping out, and he had just turned his camera off or something, and he was like, I can't believe I missed that. But yeah, just that back to back. Actually, that ended up messing my lower back up. I ended up having to go to physical therapy for about a year after that. But
See, spot.
yeah,
This is where climbing can be a team sport. You gotta save people's ankles. Uh, that story of Jim Thornburg is great. I feel like you just told me who my next guest should be. Jim is iconic. I can't believe he introed you to climbing. That's I've bumped into him many times over the years. He's his photography. Some of those photos have taken me on journeys to go to those specific places and do those climbs because
oh yeah, no, he's amazing.
he is the man. Uh, so okay, so you started out in '88, and you were in Berkeley, but I'm just kind of curious, what yeah, where did you go? Where did he take you, and how come bouldering, Greg? Because that just, when we were talking last, I couldn't believe that you instantly started bouldering and never strayed, because even me starting in the mid 90s, bouldering was made fun of.
Oh yeah, oh no, for sure. Well, and especially where I was doing it. So I started in Berkeley, California. I took this class through Cal Adventures, and up in the Berkeley Hills, there are a number of smaller rocks. There's Indian Rock, there's Mortar Rock just up the street, and there are a couple top roping rocks. One called Cragmont, and the other one called is in Remillard Park.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I learned how to top rope and wear a harness, tie knots, set up an anchor, those types of things. And then we bouldered. We bouldered down at Indian Rock. We never went up to Mortar Rock, but we bouldered a bit. But I mean, this was this was before crash pads. This was, before spotting. Um, yeah. I mean, people weren't really, I mean, people had just started wearing chalk bags, and chalk bags weren't really being made that often. And so what we actually would do is we would buy bottles of Crown Royal, and Crown Royal used to come in this like purple. I don't know, maybe they still do. Came in this purple sack with a drawstring, and that was the chalk bag. If you had one of those, man, you were awesome. And which usually, if we were bowling, we would set it on the ground. We wouldn't actually wear it, but
It's funny that whole Crown Royal thing. It's that purple bag, and I don't know if they were still used because they were good, or just that kind of became an iconic type of chalk bag for a long time. Like for many years, people had those as the chalk bag, and so anyone out there that is listening, like maybe they've seen that purple Crown Royal bag used as a chalk bag, and I don't know. That's funny that's why it's because no one was making them, right? So that just happened to be a good bag
yeah.
that worked.
Well, I mean, there were some companies that made some chalk bags, but they were designed for trad climbers. Sport climbing wasn't really a thing, and they were like, I don't know if I can do it. They were like this long,
Oh,
right?
geez.
You shove your forearm in, all the way up to your forearm, and you're not going to use that for bouldering.
So,
Although
okay.
nowadays there are giant chalk buckets, but yeah.
Yeah, it's become a whole statement piece for fashion. So, when you were bouldering at Mortar and Indian, well, you said not Mortar because I think you had mentioned before that Mortar was full of vines and wasn't quite established
Well,
yet.
actually, believe it or not, when I started at Indian Rock, I didn't know mortar existed.
Mm.
And so, yeah, because I started by myself, and I was in high school. I used to cut class in high school, and to go to Indian Rock, and I didn't have a chalk bag. I didn't have climbing shoes. I would just go barefoot, and and I would follow the chalk. I saw some chalk, and I'd be like, someone climbed this before, and so I would try it. And back in those days, you really had to learn how to land. You didn't really try as hard as you could because you didn't want to fall out of control. And as I got stronger, and got chalk and shoes, I remember I wanted to push my limits a little more. I remember, I would get on these climbs, and there would be like these sharp rocks underneath, like kind of poking through the dirt, and I would kind of look around to make sure, because the ethics were pretty hardcore back then about what you could and couldn't do, and just the idea, I mean, there was a lot of machismo tied into it too. And so just the idea that I would take some pine needles and some dirt and kind of pile them up around the rock to try to eat, make it a little easier and make it not hurt as much if I landed on it. And I would do a boulder problem, and then I'd come down and kind of look around and swipe everything away to make sure it looked the same way it did before. And so, yeah, I mean, that was my first, couple of years of climbing. Um, and I would say maybe about a year, or it probably wasn't that long, maybe 6 months after climbing at Indian Rock, I started seeing more and more people, because some people would show up, some of these old trad guys, a lot of trad guys. I mean, because mainly people would go there and they would do laps, right? Because it was all, for them it was all training. It was all training for what they call real climbing, right, which is trad climbing. And there were a couple of guys who, part of the way through the climbing would disappear. They'd walk up the hill, and after a while, I was like, "What are they doing up there?" And so I walked up, and yeah, there was this rock. It was kind of small. There was this thing called Nat's Traverse, and that was about it. There were a couple climbs to the left of it, and there was bench wall to the far right. But between bench wall and um, jungle fever, uh, there was a giant overhanging wall that was covered in vines. And, there was a thick layer of dirt with vines and grass on top. And there was one climb going up the wall. There was a tree coming out of the base, and it was a climb called Impossible Wall. And there were bolts on top, or maybe one bolt. I can't remember. It was first done by John Sherman, and it had only been done um, on top rope. And eventually, there was a guy who ended up doing it, and he was famous for falling off near the top and somehow landing on the tree and surfing the tree, instead of plummeting to his demise amongst the, or landing with his back across the tree and snapping his back. And so, I mean, that was the story of of the one guy who had done it without a rope. And then so I got stronger. I'd done mats, and I decided I was going to do impossible wall. And I was up there by myself, and or occasionally there'd be people working on mats, but we never spotted. We never used pads, and so I remember my first couple times I ended up doing it that way.
Jesus. Yeah, I've done Impossible Wall. It's kind of Mortar Rock is this local, you know, giant boulder with a bunch of really hard lines. And Impossible Wall is kind of a very proud, straight up thing, but it's scary even nowadays with pads because the landing has some big rocks and it's like a V8 that kind of stout, two moves, kind of hard. So just hearing about doing that without pads blows my mind. And yeah, sorry, I interrupt you because I want to hear
Oh, no, 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 that's
the
fine.
story
Yeah,
about how the rest of the climbs got surfaced.
yeah. So I between 1990 and about 92 or three, I didn't climb very much because I joined the military, and I ended up getting stationed back in the Bay Area again, right around 92, 93. And that was when I started climbing again at Indian Rock. And I was working my way up to the grades, and I think that's when right around the time when I did what's it called, whatever it's called,
Impossible Wall.
Impossible Wall.
Mm.
And I remember thinking about how kind of limited the climbing there was, but I didn't really think that much about it until I started traveling. And in 1994, I did my first trip to Fontainebleau, and and it was amazing. It was eye opening. I mean, I traveled through Europe. I went to the Frankenjura. I went to this climbing area, this brand at the time brand new climbing area in Slovenia, and and then climbing throughout France. But I remember I was hanging out with these of friends of mine in Germany, and they're like, "Well, where do you want to go?" And I said, "I want to go to Fontainebleau." And they're like, "Well, we know somebody who's going there. We know someone who's going there, um, and he's the climbing trainer for the German national team." And I was like, "Okay, cool." And so anyway, I did this crazy long journey, 16. I don't remember freaking how long it was, but it probably felt like 16 hours. I don't remember, but I remember he smoked a pipe, and they kept the windows closed in the car. I remember just freaking dying the entire time. But anyway, we got to Fontainebleau, and they're like, "We're meeting," and I was with these German guys, and they said, "Oh, we're meeting this guy named Patrick Edlinger." And I was like, "Patrick Edlinger? I've never heard of Patrick Edlinger." And like, okay, well, whatever, And so we went to Bacuvier. If people are listening and they know Fontainebleau, they'll know Bacuvier. So we went to Bacuvier, and we went around the corner, and I saw Patrick Edlinger. And I was like, "Oh, Patrick Edlinger. Oh, okay." And so yeah, I ended up spending, like, I don't know, a month climbing with those guys, and I had the most god awful footwork when I first went there. Um, I think we talked about this before, but when I was in the military, I started powerlifting, and I spent so much energy building up my upper body and just trying to get as strong as I could, that really what was getting me through climbs were just kind of brute force, not really any technique at all. And it wasn't until I went to Fontainebleau where I couldn't stand on anything, and the holds weren't that great. I couldn't just muscle my way through stuff. And I happened to be climbing with Patrick Langer, and he would just yell at me, like, pretty much most of the time. You put your feet back on, put your feet back on. He's like, what are you doing? And would try to show me some technique, and it was a fun time. Yeah.
Oh my God. That sounds like the trip of a lifetime. I have this image of you just in Germany. Something that I miss of, I mean, maybe this happens still in climbing, but you just hear about something happening or someone being somewhere and you just kind of go like you're like, oh, we'll set you up with this guy, like it'll work out, we'll go have fun. And
Oh yeah.
how do you even get there? And it's just different with the internet and phones and everything being pre-planned and not seeing, I mean, I'm sure you'd never seen a video of Fontainebleau. It was just, oh cool, like I hear there's cool boulders there, like let's go.
No, no. I mean, so as you said, like I as soon as I started climbing, I was a boulder, and I loved bouldering, and everyone made fun of me. So in the earlier days, people were making fun of me because they were trad climbers, and they're like, why would you just spend all that time just you know climbing around on these small rocks when you could be going to Yosemite and doing these long multi-pitch routes? And then of course sport climbing started getting popular around 90 or so, and or more popular I should say. And then of course the sport climbers were like, why are you climbing around on these small rocks and you're not getting on rope, and you know wearing spandex and stuff. And I had heard, well, first of all, like so my one of my climbing heroes, or actually my full on climbing hero at the time, was John Gill, because I'd heard you know, through the grapevine that there was this other guy, years before me who was a boulder, and that's what he did. He didn't go do the trad climbs. There certainly wasn't any sport climbing, but he wasn't doing that kind of stuff. And he had all these crazy feats of strength, upper body strength. He was a gymnast. He could do, I think, one finger, one arm, front levers and things, and
Wild.
doing one arm pull ups off of the one finger off the rings, so not like off a piece of webbing or anything. And I remember hearing about that. I'm like, I have to be able to do all of those things. And so, uh, but
I'm
for me, the fact that there was this a bouldering area, and an area that had been people had been bouldering at for 100 years or whatever, at the time. And yeah, I was so excited to go there and climb.
I don't want to take us too far away from Fontainebleau, but something that you said really rung a bell for me. Where I remember that before you got into climbing, you were you were a natural athlete already in school, but in things like football, track and field,
Mm.
very all American sports. And so, I'm curious as you started to boulder and and you saw pictures of the sport climbers in France that were skinny and more spandex. Did you just feel like that wasn't the path you wanted to go? And when you heard about guys like John Gill and just being just burly, like was your identity more along the lines of I'm strong, I'm burly, I want to do the hard thing, not so much like the kind of the skinny spandex era. What was an era that's a little different than your style, Greg?
Oh, yeah, no, I tried it a little bit, but yeah, I didn't really take to it. And the problem was for me is it's a completely different energy system, right? I mean, I was a football player. I pole vaulted. I sprinted. I played soccer. I did a whole bunch of things. Granted, soccer is a lot of endurance, but but and then I power lifted, and a lot of the stuff I really liked doing was really very short, intense bursts of strength, and and I was pretty good at sports, and I competed, in many different sports, swimming, tennis, football, soccer, track and field, and it wasn't until I started rock climbing where it was so different. It was so challenging for me, and it wasn't challenging just because of the physical aspect, but it was how mental it was. And I talked about how we weren't using pads and we weren't really using chalk, and guys were still, the guys who I talked to were still talking about, how this new sticky rubber stuff was kind of cheating sometimes. A lot of the guys, some of the guys who were bouldering and in Mortar Rock were still wearing, mountaineering boots. And uh, yeah, just there was an aspect of, there was a physical aspect, and there's a technical aspect to climbing. There's sequences you need to worry about, but there's also there was a fear factor as well that you had to account for, that that I found very challenging and very attractive. Um,
Yeah, I
so yeah.
it really sticks out for me because when I did a podcast with Joel Rusher and Jeremy Meeks not too long ago, and one of the things that just really piqued my interest was this try hard style that you seem to embody, and it was really infectious, and everyone that was around, even in my head, to be honest, Greg, from way back in the day, you were a bit louder, you were a bit more aggressive, and I mean just that you got this, this almost like football style of encouragement and the really deep try hard, and it's something that I was really attracted to because I like power. I wanted to be strong. I came from gymnastics, and there was just something about that, that loud, boisterous thing that seemed very different from the everything that had come before. It was different than the kind of like even the especially the trad climbing scene of just kind of like go off on your own, get scared, don't really talk about what you did, and there's a
Oh
different
no,
ethic.
exactly. Exactly. And I think thinking about this and talking about this, um, the kind of weightlifting football mentality that I had, um, I brought it to climbing, and because I started climbing by myself, and the way I would end up, I mean, so because I was challenging myself physically and mentally, the way I kind of approached the mental aspect of climbing and the fear aspect was for me to kind of get myself in this kind of um, kind of football, like weightlifting, more aggressive mentality in order to kind of combat the fear, I guess, that was there. And because I was climbing by myself, I didn't know what other people were doing, and so I had no idea that how other people approached it, but that was how I approached it. And for the couple of years I climbed by myself, and then when I started climbing with other people, and the other people that I was climbing with at the time, they just kind of started doing the same thing I was. so I just, I didn't realize it was that different, or unique to what I was doing.
It was infectious, and I think it does typify bouldering compared to some of the other pursuits. As bouldering started to come into vogue, it's this really big focus on that moment and that absolute try hard that you need for a specific move. And then when it comes to bouldering, also you have often smaller holds that are painful. It's less endurance based, just like you were saying, a more energy system that's focused on right now. Like do it right now. Put out all of your effort in this split second. And so I just, yeah, it's just kind of funny. It goes hand in hand, and maybe this whole thing on the ethics that were going on during that time. And I think it's hilarious that you were embarrassed to pad not even pad the landing, but to try to avoid sharp rocks, so you didn't split your skull. In the story you told me around mortar and kind of clearing off that section of mortar, I want to hear that from you, and hear about the reaction from the community, because now Mortar Rock,
Oh
it's
yeah.
not the biggest, most well-known place in the world, but for the Bay Area, it's kind of like the local hard rock to go to. And you really were instrumental in opening up this section. So yeah, maybe you could take us to Mortar and that decision you made to, well, I'll leave it to you to tell us about it.
So I think it was around maybe 95, 96, somewhere in there. It was during the summer. And Mortar Rock used to have these really big vines, and some of them were, about this big around, maybe what I'm holding my fingers about three inches, 2 or 3 inches in diameter. Um, and they were pretty much all dead. Like which I didn't know until I landed, and I think I fell off in more what's it called, impossible wall one time in a weird way, and I snapped through one, like through my back hit one, and I snapped right through it. And I remember looking at the wall, and I've been looking at the wall for a long time and saying, you know what, there are holes in there, and I bet you it'll go, but I don't know what's on top. Like I don't know what the top outs are like. And one day it was raining, and I just happened to be out there, kind of just looking at the wall, and and I was like, you know what, I snapped through one of these before, and then so I kind of wiggled one and kind of started messing with it, and it snapped. And I was with this friend of mine, and I don't know what got into me, but I decided to start running through them as if I was tackling somebody. And so I just started smacking my shoulder. I just like smacked my shoulder into it, and it would snap. And then I just started running faster and faster, and then I would just smack my shoulders through them, and bop, 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 bop. Eventually I'd snap them all. And it had cleared away, it had opened up this wall. And I remember, so I was looking at the top, and I decided I was going to clear it off. And so I set up a rope, and I spent 2 weeks, digging through the ground at the top, brushing it off, knocking off old, stuff that could get knocked off, and ended up cleaning the whole thing up, removing everything from the base, and throwing everything away, and yeah, and then it opened up this whole wall. And while I was doing it, the old trad guys who were doing their laps on, whatever, Natch Traverse, and doing their traversing all over the place, they just criticized me the whole time. What are you doing? Nothing will ever go there. You're just tearing things up for no reason. You're wasting your time. And I mean, even some of the stronger climbers. I mean, there's a guy named Scott Fry who put up Jungle Fever, which is like V8, right? I mean, he was one of the guys who was like, he was maybe less vocal, but he was certainly like, well, nothing will ever go there. What are you doing? And so once I cleaned it up, the very first climb I did there, I put up this climb just to the right of Jungle Fever, called New Wave, and I called it New Wave, the New Wave, because that's how I saw the what was going to be happening on this wall. Is like, kind of get rid of these old guys, and I'm going to start putting up climbs here. And then I put up, I don't know, a bunch of climbs there.
Fuck yeah. I love that story. That's just out with the old, in with the new. Those climbs are now, I mean, Nat's Traverse will always be iconic, but New Wave is, I mean, it's a test piece, Greg. It's a very difficult entrance into that upper grade range. And now we have, I mean, what's there? You must have uncovered, like, Don't Worry, Be Snappy, Impossible Traverse. I don't
That
know when
was
Chris did that, but yeah.
Tom Richardson
Mm-hmm.
did Don't Worry, Be Snappy. I did a sit start to New Wave called the Kraken.
The Kraken, yeah.
I did a lower start. So once the tree was removed from below, I didn't remove the tree, by the way. The tree was still there. The city ended up removing the tree. But there was a tree growing out from the base underneath Impossible Wall. You could start on the tree, sitting on the tree, just to get up to the holds of Impossible Wall. And so that's where the climb started. And then so once the tree was gone, I did a stand start called Mission Impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And then I figured, I was like, hey, a sit start could go here. And then so I put up a sit start there called Chinese Connection.
Jesus, Greg, you did UFA Chinese Connection? Yeah, amazing. Just that is
yeah.
That
and then I did
climb.
some of the climbs,
Yeah.
some of the climbs to the right. But yeah, I think Chinese Connection was sometime around 2000, 2002 maybe.
Yeah.
I don't remember. It was
Amazing.
It was,
Yeah,
it was
amazing V13. That's just kind of a must-do test piece for anyone in that area. I kind of
it was hard for its time.
Yeah. It's still hard,
Yeah.
man. I kind of got to ask a little bit about this climb to the right. There's this legendary. I don't know if there's this climb called me Magdalia. Oh, God, I'm blanking on the name now. Do you know what I'm
Oh,
talking about? Me Mag.
Maldición. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you put that up? Is that uh,
Yep.
so? When I started climbing at Mortar in maybe 2014, and we knew about this climb, like maybe Randy Perot had shown us or something. We just kind of were like, is this real? Like, we're like, oh yeah, it's like an old Greg Lowe line. Like, we're like, are you sure? I don't think this goes. Like, we kind of had this like a whole thing. Like, is this just like an urban myth? Because it was so hard. It just had this undercling start that was so powerful that seemed almost impossible. And so, yeah, now that I know that you did all the other climbs, so
That was actually an interesting climb because I remember specifically wanting to do it without pads. So because it's an undercling problem, the higher you are on pads, the easier it's going to be. And so I wanted to, I think I started somewhere like this, way above my head, and I did it that way just because there's a stone slab below it. The ground is not going to erode. It's always going to be the same. And so I figured, if I do it this way, future generations can all do it this way. But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized anyone shorter than me was going to have a problem, right? Because it was already pretty high for me to start off these underclings, and yeah, I don't know. We ended up having some we used to talk a lot about ethics and the rules of climbing and stuff, and
we
so
still do.
I
We
was like,
still do,
well,
Greg.
yeah. Oh no, I'm sure people still do and argue about grades and yeah, and they're concerned about getting their stuff downgraded or whatever, and um, and so yeah, I kept thinking, I was like, well, if someone's shorter than me, it shouldn't be a problem if they put pads. I'm like, but where do you draw the line, right? And so that kind of gave me I started getting the idea that sometimes not every climb is for every person. I mean, not every person should be able to climb every climb. I mean, there are some climbs out there where the distance between the holds are so far that someone short can't do it,
Hmm.
or makes it ridiculously hard. Um, yeah, and so that started a whole conversation for us, which was
Well,
you know
I'll have you know, my buddy Max Zolotukin did it at some point, and he did it without a pad. I'm 90
nice.
percent sure. So just great climb. Yeah, I wanted to. Well, first of all, I just as someone that climbed a lot in the Bay Area, I just loved hearing about the actual birth of kind of mortar rock as we know it, and it's interesting hearing about all this changes to the landscape and the tree, especially by Impossible Wall, because I always wondered why the heck does this climb start here? Impossible Wall is kind of
Yeah, why
the
does it start so
intro.
high, right?
Yeah, I think we had the stack pads, and I was like, "What? This doesn't even make sense at all." And then the stand start uh, Mission Impossible,
Mission Impossible.
um,
Yeah,
that made more sense to me. And so yeah, I just thanks for well, that's the history lesson.
that's
Yes.
why Impossible Wall starts there. Yeah, it's because there was a tree in the way, and so you just kind of sat on the tree, and then you could reach the holes.
So you caught some flack for cutting down the trees. By the way, there's been some climbers who
Oh,
get canceled for that. I won't name names, but that if you did that today, Greg, people would be up in arms. But since you already did it, you get grandfathered in. It's okay.
oh yeah, oh yeah. No, I was really afraid because there was. Yeah, I mean, well, I shouldn't say really afraid. That's not true. Um, so believe it or not, I don't know if people do this nowadays, but I mean, believe it or not, like people would get in arguments with one another, and there would be fistfights, right? I mean, there's some very famous stories about Ron Kauk and John Backer and those guys getting in fistfights over climbs, and people would kind of just there was always the idea that if you disagree with somebody, you could get in a fight with them, and to be perfectly frank, I wasn't afraid of anybody. And so I just did what I wanted to do, and if they wanted to bring it, which they never did, they were welcome to.
Well, I'm glad that I'm glad you moved forward with it and opened up that area. Uh, it, so On this line, this thinking of ethics and what is okay in bouldering, since you were such an early pioneer in bouldering, how did you feel about pads? And it sounded like initially you had some thoughts that the old guard had kind of put in your head around, hey, maybe I should not cover this pointy rock, even though that sounds ridiculous nowadays. But yeah, as you progressed, like, what did you think about ethics and pads, and how did you bring that into your climbing?
That's it's interesting, because I went through quite an evolution. Um, One of my proudest sins was, a climb called Midnight Lightning, which I would assume a lot of people have heard of that climb. It's in Yosemite, and um, there were a couple people in the Bay Area who had tried it and famously gotten hurt. One guy broke his wrist falling off the mantle sideways and stuff, and yeah, I mean, it was this notoriously difficult and scary climb. And so I remember, I think it was 94, 95. I started going up there and trying the climb, and yeah, we didn't use crash pads or spotters, and I remember trying to figure out the moves and climbing, and a couple times I got to the lip and didn't know what to do, and I remember, as soon as I got to the lip, and there's a pretty good hold, a pretty good undercling there that you can kind of hang out and look around, and you can get enough time to think about how scary it is. And and so I would get up there and think, oh yeah, well, if I slip off this, I'm going to break my wrist, like this guy that I know. And so I started getting up there, and I tried it a couple times and fell off, and one day I thought, I was like, you know what, I'm strong enough, I can do it. And I decided to cheat, and so I had a thermarest, an inflatable sleeping mattress, and it had a lifetime warranty. And so I was like, if I land on it and pop it, it's okay. I can get, they'll give me a new one. I'll just tell them it popped for whatever reason. And so I remember blowing it up, and the thing was about this wide. It's not just, and it was about this thick. It was like, maybe an inch thick. And I remember setting it, because there's a big slab below the mantle, and I remember trying to figure out where I was going to land if I fell. And so I would position it, and I started climbing it. And one of the trickiest things for me is I'd never seen anyone climb. I'd never even seen anyone on the climb before, and because there weren't people around who were trying to boulder, and so I'd never even seen anyone on it. I'd heard the history of it, certainly, but I didn't know how tall the climbers who had done it were. I'd heard there was a good hold above the mantle. I didn't know exactly how good. I didn't know how far specifically it was. I didn't know if I could reach it, or whether or not I would have to use different beta. And so there was a bunch of kind of unknowns, and there was never any chalk up there. And so this one day I got the thermarest, I set it up, and I started climbing. I got to the lightning bolt, and my footwork was terrible because my time with Ed didn't really stick, and so I was grabbing, my feet were coming off, and I was campusing to the lip and doing all kinds of things, and I got to the lip, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna figure this out, and I tried to do the manta press, and my hand slipped off, and I fell, and of course I missed the thermarest, but I'd land on the slab, ow, my heels hurt, and I kind of would fall over, and I would lie there for a while, and then I got up, and I would I would motivate myself, come on, Greg, you can do this, kind of psyching myself up, and then I'd get up there, and I would do it again, and I'd fall off and land in a different place, and each time I was like, oh, well, this is where I landed that time, and I would move the thermarest there, and then I'd fall again and land in a different spot, and so I kept moving the thermarest back and forth, and I'd been doing it for a couple hours, falling off a bloody climb, missing the pad every time, and I'm sitting there resting, and all of a sudden, out of the woods, I see these three guys coming down, and one of them is Ron Kauk, who I'm like, oh my gosh, Ron Kauk, first ascensionist of Midnight Lightning, a hero of mine. He's coming toward me. I'm like, what? And then Boone Speed, who I'd heard of, who was like, doing hard climbs in Utah, and then this British climber named Sean Miles, who was a super strong guy. And uh, they all those three guys were coming out of the woods, and I remember seeing them and kind of watching them, and they came up and they're like, "Hey man, you want a spot?" And I was like, "Spot?" I was like, "Heck yeah, I'll take a spot." Spotting was still like kind of a new idea to me, and I was like, "Okay, cool, yeah, I'll totally take a spot." And so this time I psyched myself up, like, "Okay, Ron's here, got to do it. I'm gonna do it." And so I went up and I do the moves, and still my feet are falling off. I'm sketching, and I get to the lip and I press up into the mantle. And again, I don't know how far away that hold is, and so as I'm reaching, I'm like not quite sure because my head's right against the rock, and I decide that hey, I've got a spotter. I'm going for it, and so I lunge, and as I lunged, my left hand, the mantle hand, slips off, and I'm kind of falling backwards and end up hitting the hold. Unfortunately, it's pretty good. And then pull on, and then they're like, "Yay!" clapping and stuff, and they tell me how to get down, and I come down, and I get some high fives and stuff, and man, it was such an amazing experience for me. And then after they're like, "Hey, we're gonna go do these other boulder problems," and I went around and started climbing with them, and Ron gave me his number, and we started climbing together. And man, about a year later, he was telling this he was telling me the story. He goes, "Yeah," he goes, "Yeah, I was with those guys. I was with Boone and Sean, and we were up looking at climbs up there, and we saw this guy at Midnight Lightning. We're like, ah ha ha, no one's ever on that. Let's watch this guy. We'll laugh at him when he falls off, And then they're watching. They're like, oh my god, he's getting high, and they're like, oh my god, he's on the mantle. Oh my god, he fell off. Oh, And then they're like, okay, he's done. He's got to be done. And they're like, wait, he's getting back on it. And like, oh man, he's at the lip. Oh my god, he fell off again. And so apparently they had been watching me off and on for like 2 hours, and eventually they were so nerve wracked because I kept falling off the mantle. They were like, this guy's gonna die. We've got to go down there, and so they came down like, we've got to spot him. And so they came down, and Ron was under me spotting me, and he said, all of a sudden you got up there, and then you popped for it. I saw your hand slip, and he said, my life flashed before my eyes. I thought I was gonna die, right? Because he's a pretty small. I mean, he's not a small guy. He and I are about the same height, but he's a lot skinnier. And so he was like, "Oh my god, I thought I was gonna die." And yeah, it was funny. It was funny to hear that story from the other's perspective as well.
Oh man, that's gotta be, yeah, I don't blame you for that being one of your favorite climbs of your life. That's special, man. I
Yeah, it was a really special memory.
having Ron Kauk there to spot you, and then I can't believe that you basically dynoed for the mantle. It's for people who haven't been there, where you mantle. It's probably, I don't know, it's probably not more than like 12 feet or so, but it's kind of awkward, and the foot you're mantling on, you're almost kind of horizontal, and you do, and that the mantling hand, it's more like a rail. There's not really a hold. It's kind of just a rail that you
Yeah, like
like
only this part of your hand is actually on it.
yeah.
I think a lot of the mistake people make is they try to wrap the bottom
Mm,
because it feels more secure.
uh,
But
uh,
yeah, you're only like this part of your hand, and then your foot's on a sloper.
So you may not know this, but it just kind of made me think of Ron doing the FA. Did he go down it on a rope? Well, I mean, clearly you went ground up, which I don't know. Like, what were the ethics on going to
Oh
the
no, no,
top?
no! You can never use a rope. Oh my god! Oh my god! Using a rope was so against the rules. Oh my! So the thing about going ground up is you are experiencing each move, from the bottom, the way I mean, the way we thought you were supposed to, right? You're experiencing the fear, but you're also experiencing the unknown, right? You're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what that holds like. I don't, and so just that discovery while you're climbing was part of the experience. And so the idea of coming down on top rope and rehearsing that move over and over again until it wasn't scary anymore, and so you could know how the distance of everything and you knew the body position, that robbed you of part of the experience of the boulder problem, which frankly should be a personal thing, but it also took away from the difficulty of the climb, because part of the difficulty of the climb, physically, it wasn't that challenging, right? If your fingers are strong enough, it's not that challenging. The challenging part, I don't know how many stories we had of people who could float the bottom and get to the lip and then couldn't do the mantle, right? The mantle and the psychological aspect of the mantle, they were part of the difficulty, and top roping removed that. And so, I mean, I knew guys in the Bay Area. So after I did it, the guys that I climbed with, they all started working on it. And then one of the guys, he ended up deciding to do it on a top rope. And friendships were lost. I mean, that guy never climbed with us again because some of the other guys shunned him, like completely shunned him. And yeah, I mean, it was, I doubt people do that nowadays, but yeah, yeah, I mean, our concepts of what was acceptable were, a lot different back then.
That's really cool. Greg, I didn't do it on a top rope. I never rehearsed it. Don't worry, man. I actually really don't mind if people were to do that. But what made me think of is that the thing about that mantle, you talked about how your kind of cheek was against the wall. I remember having to really reach far. You get into the position, you're really mantled up, and then it's kind of full extension. And I'm just trying to imagine Ron Cow like getting up into that position and then kind of groping around for something. And,
Yeah.
it's licheny. It's, it's hard for me to imagine going and mantling with full commitment. It just shows, I mean, yeah, venturing onto the uncertainty. Yeah, I love it.
So there's a funny story. So a guy named John Yablonsky, who is no longer with us. Yeah, I mean, he died pretty young. He apparently was sleeping under midnight lighting in kind of a drug-addled haze, looked up and said, this thing will go. And he got the two guys that he knew that would probably be strong enough, John Backer and Ron Kauk, those two guys who could probably do it, and told them, and they thought he was crazy at first. And eventually they started working on it and realized it would go. And apparently, at one point there was a bigger hold where the mantle is, where the undercling is. There was a bigger hold there. And Backer one time, and I don't remember, I think it was before the first ascent, but I remember that the story is Backer broke it. And Ron got so pissed at him, he said, now it'll never go. And he grabbed the hold and threw it at him. And and so that's, I mean, those are the types of interactions we used to have with people. But so I don't know if the bigger hold allowed them to kind of lean back and look and get a better idea of how good that hole was. I don't know, but I would be very surprised if they had top roped it.
Yeah. No, I would guess that they hadn't, but it just is, it's just mind blowing. I liked what you said, where the grade kind of reflected that whole experience of coming from the bottom, of feeling each move as they are intended to be felt because you're coming from the bottom. And I like that you kind of put out that caveat that, hey, if you want to do something your own way, do it, although you may lose some friends over it. But there is just something about that really experience first kind of thinking in climbing. And I am not here to say we've lost that by any means. It's just remembering that focus of going on a wild adventure and hopefully making out unscathed.
Oh yeah. So, I mean, to get to the ethics part, one of my earliest guidebooks was for this area. Someone, I think I'd got it at a yard sale or something, but it was an old guidebook for an area called Lover's Leap in the Tahoe area. It's a trad area, and the foreword, the preface, was written by Royal Robbins, an old school Yosemite climber, and he talks about ethics and the game of climbing and trying to do climbs in the way that the first ascensionist did it. So you use a style that is as good as the first ascensionist, right? So if it's climbed ground up and it's not bolted, you don't start adding bolts or whatever it might be, and and then he talks about, oh yeah, but you know what? This is just a game we're playing, right? So if you want to do it in a different way, other than adding bolts, right? If you want to do it in a different way, fine, go ahead. You want to top rope it first, fine. But for him, he talks about using sticky rubber, and he talks about using the crutch of chalk. And he says, as long as if you do an ascent using the crutch of chalk, you have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be honest with the people who you're telling, the people you tell that you did it. I used chalk. That's not the way the first ascensionist did it. It made it easier. And yeah, I mean, so yeah, just the whole idea of doing something on top rope at the time for us, it was like, fine, do it. Well, for me at least, it was like, fine, do it, but just understand that it's not the same climb that we did.
I had a lot of pads underneath me when I did Midnight Lightning. I'm very embarrassed, and I had watched many videos
Well, I
beforehand.
mean, yeah, I mean, paths, ethics, and things change, and things need to move forward, and things need to advance. And I mean, if we had kept that mindset, I mean, sure, we'd be doing harder and harder climbs, but I mean, we wouldn't be making the jumps that we are now.
Oh, I'm joking because for me, what I always see is these new technologies, i.e., chalk or sticky rubber. It unlocks and pads. It unlocks the ability to have those same experiences on theoretically, I'll say a grander scale, but it's just, you can get higher off the deck when you're going to land on foam. So all of a sudden pads unlock something that even you and Ron Kauk and your intense bravery of climbing these things without a pad, there are things that, like talus rocks where there's all sorts of just, you would break your ankle even falling 2 feet, that now can be climbed using crash pads, and you can get even further off the deck. So that's my stance, is that hopefully these new things just allow you to unlock uh, the same sort of experiences in a broader array of spaces. So, that's my little
Oh,
ethics thinking.
absolutely. I mean, the stuff that people are doing in like the buttermilks. I mean, it's insane. I mean, at some point you're like, maybe you should put a rope on that thing.
Well, you were in the buttermilks really early. What did you think of
Yes.
those climbs? What did you look at that you're like, oh, I'm not gonna, that's not even a boulder, or did you even have that thinking? Yeah, just take me to the buttermilks when you first started
Oh
going
no, no,
there.
I didn't have that. I was like, that's a yeah. I mean, these are boulders. I'm climbing them. I'm first ascent. Just like you do the same style as the first ascensionist. If a climb had been done all the way to the top without a rope, I'm not going to use a rope. And uh, and some of the easier things had been done, like um, had been done all the way to the top. Uh, but and I think, which one is it? Is Grandma Peabody the one with evolution on it? I
Grandpa.
don't remember. Is it Grandpa? Yeah. So it's Grandpa Peabody. That had been done. I mean, sorry, it had been climbed to the top any number of times, but certainly not on that overhanging section. Um, but yeah, no, I remember going around, and there wasn't much of a there wasn't much of a guidebook. If I remember correctly, the first guidebook I saw, there's a climb called Ironman Traverse. I think they called it like 511. Yeah, yeah. I don't remember exactly, because in terms of bouldering grades, there was just the B system, which was a system that was designed to change over time. And so B3, I believe, was the climb had been done by one person. B2 was, climb had been done by a couple people, was still hard, and then B1 was, it was still pretty hard, but a bunch of people had done it. And so as soon as someone did a B3, more than one person did a B3, it immediately became a B2. And so yeah, I mean, those were the type of grades that the type of way we thought about grades. And so we weren't grade chasing because there was no grade to chase.
That's so cool. Yeah, when did the V scale enter your repertoire or your?
Um, So the first time so I started climbing in Fontainebleau in '94, and then I went back every year for I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years. Um, and so I was first introduced to the Fontainebleau grades, and the V scale I didn't encounter until, let me see here. Well, I went to Waco, and I can't remember what year that was. Maybe '94, '95, somewhere in there. Um, and and the climbing was so different from Fontainebleau that I had a hard time reconciling the two grades. So I couldn't say, this climb in Fontainebleau is whatever 7Bs, and this climb in Waco is V8 or whatever, and they're the same thing, or V7 or whatever. And it wasn't really until Fred Nicole came through Yosemite where, he said, okay, where he said, okay, Midnight Lightning is 7B plus, and Thriller is 7C. And then he gave it Fontainebleau grades. And so I was like, okay, Midnight Lightning is 8, and Thriller's like 9. So therefore, 7B plus is 8, 7C is 9. And so that was the way. So for then on, I've always used Midnight Lightning as my standard for V8 and for 7B plus. And uh, kind of funny story. When I was working at 510, this was in '98. A Fontainebleau legend named Jackie Godoff. He called a 510, and because my boss was this famous Belgian climber, and he had asked my boss, he goes, "Do you understand the V system?" And because in his guidebook he wanted to have a comparison of V grades and Fontainebleau grades. He goes, "No, I don't, but I have this guy Greg who understands the system." And so he asked me, and so I said, okay, well, Midnight Lightning is V, 7B plus, and 7B plus is V8, and 7C is 9, and so he took the grades that way, and translated them based on what I thought the Fontainebleau and V scale was, and apparently I got it a little wrong because I had some friends who got mad at me for calling things that.
Uh, so you've mentioned going to Waco early in the night or in the mid '90s, and actually, one of the questions I got for you was from Jason Kale, who you mentioned Bishop and that steep
Oh,
overhang on.
Jason, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember climbing. Yeah, first time I met him was in Yosemite, I think.
So
Yeah.
he wanted, so Waco is a special place for him, and he's actually been on the podcast before. And Jason wanted to hear what your first impressions of Waco were, and he also wanted to hear more about Focus since he remembers trying that with you when you guys were still vying for the FA.
Ah, yeah. So I've been climbing in Fontainebleau for I think 2 years at this point, and I'd spent months there, climbing with legends, right? Climbing with legends of Fontainebleau. And I had just an amazing experience. And just the whole, at the time, nowadays people don't use pulf, but just the whole experience of, having your little mat and having the pulf and having the rag and, doing circuits and just the whole, being in this magical forest and just the whole thing, the whole place was just really just amazing place for me. And when I was in the States, people who had never been to Fontainebleau kept telling me, oh yeah, Waco's way better than Fontainebleau. Waco's great. Waco's amazing. It's the best bouldering in the world. And I kept hearing stories like that. And I was like, wow, okay, Waco must be amazing. And so I went there, and uh, the first day I went to the Dragon's Den and got on this climb. I think it was called 3 Star Arete, because I was like, oh, 3 stars, that's pretty good. And I started on the climb, and I think my first attempt I snapped a hold off. My second attempt I snapped a foothold off, and then I think my third attempt I did it. But I was so irritated because and then I went around and got on a couple other climbs and broke off holds and actually the running joke was that I could break holds off critical holds off climbs and the grade wouldn't change. And for some reason the grade didn't change. And so I remember there was like moonshine roof, I think center. I don't know if you've ever been on that climb, but at the lip there used to be a massive jug, and I broke the jug off, and so now it's just like this lip hole. It's like this pinch, um, and I snapped, and then but the grade didn't change. And then and anyway, I was breaking holds left and right, and I remember just being, I was like, how can you compare this to Fontainebleau? This is not the same, And then after I spent a while there, and it definitely grew on me, and I think it's absolutely one of the best
Yeah.
places in the world to climb, but it's a different thing than Fontainebleau.
You were cleaning it up, Greg. If you were able to snap that stuff off, it needed to be cleaned. I would think that Waco would have suited your style in that it is thought of as being more powerful. You do have to keep your feet on because it's steep and you can't be swinging around, but it's definitely thuggier than, well, font has its moments, but font I think of as being very technical. And so, yeah, I'm just kind of curious to hear how you took to Waco. And then I do want to hear more about the FA of Focus, because to me, that is kind of the V10 to do in Waco. I think it gave me one of my better experiences in Waco personally.
Yeah. So I actually took to the climbing at Waco. I actually so climbing in the Bay Area and spending most of my time climbing in Yosemite, I ended up climbing on a lot of slopers and a lot of crimps, and we never climbed on pockets. And so whenever I went to a pocket area, I was like, I don't know what to do. And so my crimp strength was pretty good. So going to Waco, I ended up doing pretty well, if I remember correctly. There were some test pieces that you were supposed to do if you went there, right? And you were a strong climber. And so I went and I did some of the test pieces.
Like which ones? I'm curious.
And
Which ones?
I'm trying to remember. I don't know, like stuff in the Martini roof, I think Fred put up like this thing called Schninkel and Purple Flower and Chupacabra, and which is actually a funny story related to the Focus, and full serve, just those types of things.
Those are great.
I mean, nothing terribly difficult, but pretty hard at the time. And so one day I was off in I don't remember what that area is called. Is it East Spur Maze, something like that? East Spur. And I was wandering around, and I'd heard about this climb called Chupacabra, and it was like V11. It was hard. Fred put it up, and I didn't know where it was, and so I was wandering around, and I saw this tall overhanging wall with these beautiful little crimps on it, and this funky lip encounter pretty high off the ground, and then it goes for another, I don't know, 10, 12 feet. I don't know, I'm not sure. And I remember looking at it going, man, this is amazing. This must be Chupacabra. And so I got on the climb, and I tried to figure out where it started, and so we started down right, feet on the ground, all the way on the ground, and it started like on this mono, which I've used this finger, mono crimp, and it was like it's some really cool kind of Gastoni moves to some crimps, and then you do that move twice, I think, and then you get to this lip encounter where you get the sloper and you put your feet on not great holds, and you lunge up to this big kind of overhanging flake, right? And I worked on it for a couple days, and I kept getting to that sloper, looking at that flake, wondering if the flake was going to break, and thinking, well, Fred did this, and Fred is not a small guy. So if Fred can hang that thing and it didn't break, then I can hang that thing and it won't break. But I kept getting there and like kind of not fully going for it. And we had so at this point I was starting to use crash pads, and so I think we had like one, maybe two cordless pads, and so I had like the equivalent of like massive carpet for us, of pads, and but I was still it was still in my head, that move, and so I would get there, and finally I told my spotter, I said, okay, when I get to that move, I need you to yell, focus, because I was, my mind was not focused, and so I got up there, I got to the lip, and then my spotter yelled focus. And I was like, okay, yeah. I did the move, and then I got up, and I pulled up, into the crack, and I remember getting into the crack, going, there are all these like loose blocks and flakes that were breaking off, and I was like, I looked down at my spotter, I was like, I don't think this gets done very often. And so I remember pulling this off, and I was like throwing these rocks off into the bushes and stuff, and I ended up topping it off. And actually, the down climb is one of the scariest things I've ever done. Right? It's feels like you're climbing on potato chips, where you can't really pull down on them or out on them. You have to kind of push in on the hold as you're climbing. And so anyway, I got down, and I went back to Pete's that day, and which is where we were staying. And I told everyone, hey, I did Chupacabra. It was great. You guys should go do it. It's amazing moves and stuff. And Todd Skinner had a house there, which I know is now like the Waco Rock Ranch, I guess. But he had this house there, and apparently he had a map of the entire park. And the chef that they had at the house, he found me like a day or two later, and he goes, this climb that you're calling Chupacabra, that's not on the map. That climb's never been done before. And I was like, oh, really? I was like, oh, no wonder it felt like it wasn't done very often. And so anyway, I thought about it, and for me, the name Focus seemed fairly obvious based on the challenge that I had with it.
That's really cool. I love that. I've heard a few stories of this where people climb things for an FA thinking it's been done before, or it's an established climb with a different name. They just got lost. But Focus is the reason for me it stands out as such a cool one is you climb these kind of perfect crimps up a face, but then you're pretty off the deck. And the move that you're talking about where you kind of were lunging to the flake, you have this not so great hold as it starts to slab out, and then you have it's almost like a big jutting of dihedral. It almost turns into like a dihedral, and you pinch the left side of that dihedral, and you have to go to it with like a off balance. Like I remember I couldn't keep
Yes.
my left foot on, so you kind of stab to this pinch that keeps you from barn dooring off at I don't know 12 feet up or something, and then you pull into that dihedral, and it's easier. But man, you're off the deck there, and if things were breaking, that's terrifying. But it's just it's such a cool to me that experience of being up there and then venturing into the uncertain like we were talking about before and sticking that move is just I mean it's a good memory for me. So thanks for blazing that trail. And it really I want to keep on picking at this thing of focusing and trying hard in that moment. It's just something that I love in climbing. I know it's something that you enjoy as well. Like was that atypical of your crew? Someone who would just be like, no, right now is the moment for me to muster not just my strength but like my fear and kind of like show up right there. I just think I still want to pick on that area.
So one of the things we haven't really talked about, I think, is spotting. And I took this kind of aggressive football weightlifting mindset. And certainly, if you're going, so anyone who knows about weightlifting, if you're going for your max on something, you need to get yourself in the right mindset, right? So if you grab the bar and you feel weak and you don't feel like you're in the right position, you should let go and get your head, start your routine back over. And the thing is, you need to get a routine in order to get yourself in the right headspace. And so I took that idea to climbing, where I guess in golf they would call it your pre-shot routine. Where for me, for my, I would fool around on the climb, whatever, blah blah blah, have fun. But when I knew I was going to send, or I was going I was going for an onsite or something, I would do my pre-climb routine to get myself in the right headspace. And if it didn't work, I would back away and do it again. And one of the things I learned from that, because as I was climbing, I would kind of in order to get myself in that headspace, I would, I would sometimes I would kind of black out, but um, and kind of not really know what I did, and I would succeed, and which is kind of a fun, which actually is apropos of nothing. But what I was going to say is I was taking that same kind of aggressive mindset, and when I first started spotting people, yeah, I mean, I would kind of yell at them, and I would, and I would get aggressive, and as I spotted more and I got more experience, I realized that it's counterproductive oftentimes because it really depends on the climber themselves and what can motivate them. And oftentimes, the guys that I was climbing with, I would see they would fail mentally, and it wasn't, it's not like they were afraid or anything, but they would start off the climb by going, oh well, let me just give it a shot, or let me just give it a try, and giving it a try gives you the room for failure, allows you to excuse your failure. I'm just giving it a try, right? You want to get off it, you want to get on, and you want to say, I'm going to do it, right? You want to say, I'm going to send this thing right now, so that so the reason why you fail is not because you're failing mentally. If you fail, it might be conditions, it might be you grabbed a hold wrong, it might be that you're just not strong enough, it might be your beta's wrong, but you're not failing because you didn't believe in yourself. And so understanding that and watching these guys climb, I realized that just screaming at them was not the best way. And so I started to evolve my spotting technique where I would figure out, depending on who the climber was, if they needed a calm voice, I would give them a calm voice. I would say, "You got this. You got this. Come on, stay strong. I'm with you. I'm with you the whole way." If they were afraid, sometimes I might, which I guess nowadays would be considered a dab, but just before they would climb, I would touch them just a little bit, little fingertip. Just go, "I'm here. I will catch you. Don't worry. I've got you." And then so to try to give them the right mindset so they can continue going, kind of fight that fear, fight whatever is going on in their head, and which kind of got me kind of evolved into this much more, I guess, collaborative idea between the climber and the spotter, and so that really, I guess, ties into this idea of putting yourself in the optimal space to be able to climb as well as you possibly can. And for me, that was part of it.
Yeah, having someone you can turn to that is there with you, whatever that means, that they're going
Yeah,
to do their best to make sure when you try hard, if you come winging off, that they'll spot you. And that kind of tap, that really doesn't get done anymore, but that was something I used to do too. Both I didn't mind it being done to me. It's just kind of like a, hey, I'm right here. My arms are right here next to you. But I guess that
yeah.
would be considered a dab, but it's really helpful to know that they're right there with you. Uh, I, I want to ask about this pre-send ritual of yours. Maybe you don't have to get into the specifics of what the ritual was, but what kind of mental state were you entering? I understand the collaborative effort with having someone there with you that's kind of helping you out, but what kind of mindset did you try to adopt that lets you be your best?
Um, so years ago, actually, the first time I went to Europe was to do some competitions um, there, and I went with a fellow by the name of Hans Florine, and he handed me a book called Peak Performance, which I'm pretty sure is not in print anymore. But he in turn had gotten that from Robin Erbisfield, and it had been kind of making its way around the climbing circuit at the time. And really, what it was a book about weightlifting actually, but it was a book about how to train yourself mentally. That physical training itself was inadequate for peak performance, and so a big part of that was visualization, or one of the things I took away was being able to kind of visualize success. And visualizing success isn't about saying, thinking about, oh, well, I'm just going to grab every hold and I'm going to crush it and it's going to feel easy and I'm just going to. Visualizing success is visualizing it realistically, realizing that you're not going to hold every hold perfectly, that your hands might feel slippery, that you might feel a little weak, that you might get scared, but being able to visualize yourself fighting through those things as you're climbing. You're like, okay, all right, I might not grab that right, but and then so you think about, okay, well, how am I going to deal with that? Okay, well, it'll be okay because I know that I can keep going. Um, and so part of what I would do is I would kind of run the. So it actually took me a while to kind of, or at first at least, to get myself in the right headspace. Sometimes it would take half an hour. Eventually, I got to the point where I could do it in like a minute or so. But basically, you sit there and you visualize every single move, every single foothold, every single thing that could slightly go wrong, and believe in yourself that you can make it through and get to the point where you believe that you're going to do it. If you are leaving the ground not believing you can do it, then you shouldn't try it. Then you shouldn't try it. Or at least that was the way I was. I mean, if people are okay just falling off a bunch, that's fine. But for me, like it was really important to on site or to do something with a few tries, and so I really used that to get myself in the right headspace. And then of course I would do that, and then I would give myself a little like I can do it, just believe in myself, and then I would get going, and it ended up being a very kind of a successful technique for me, and it's something that I encourage other people to do. And it for each person the routine is going to be different, but find a routine that works for you to get you in the right headspace. Yeah.
That makes me think of what Joel Rusher brought up on the podcast about how he used to tell Joel, "Show me," and it rings true there, because it's not just I can do. Oh, you think you can do it? Like,
yeah,
show me.
Well, then show me. Then show me. You're telling me you can do it. Show me. Yeah, and so I've used the show me a lot before. Yeah, so that's something that definitely because with the people that I've climbed with, they understand this idea that I had of making sure that you believe that you can do it, and so they're like, I'm going to do it. I can do it. I can do it. Like, well, then show me. Do it now. And then they're like, okay, this time.
Yeah. I think that really, that wording and setting up that way of thinking is a really important part of sending. And it's very different to be up there and to be in that mindset of, it's right now. I am going to show up. I'm going to prove to Greg and myself that I can do this. Like, I'm not just kidding around. I'm not just trying. And you have to have that commitment when you're doing your best. And I got to tell you, man, that I think you influenced Joel. I mean, I know you influenced Joel and Jeremy, and then they influenced me. And it's the ball was rolling there from maybe that book got handed around, and it's something that I use to this day. It's something I really connect with in climbing itself. Like it's what I get out of climbing, is that there's no you can't fake it. You always know deep down if you really tried your best or if you were just kind of half-assing it. And so I like that you also brought that to the crew, where it's kind of calling someone out. Like it's like, oh really? Like let's see it. Let's do it right now. And so I appreciate that. Yeah.
And you know what? I mean, frankly, it was okay. It was okay if you didn't do it. It was obviously it's okay if you didn't do it, but it helps you realize what you need to train, right? It's not, oh, it's the conditions, or, oh, I'm not strong enough. It's, oh, I didn't believe in myself, right? I said I was going to do it, and I got up there and I didn't believe. And then I decided to not try as hard as I could. And which, helps you identify weaknesses, which I think is a good thing.
Well, conversely, if you don't do it and you did believe in yourself, it also helps you know what to train.
Absolutely. 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 Yeah.
Did you did you have moments where I know you adopted this mindset early, but did you also have weaknesses in your mindset early on? Is this something that you encountered yourself and you had to overcome? Is there any climbs that you remember where you were like, oh, Greg, I'm just wussing out, and you're talking to yourself, and I need to change my attitude?
well, certainly Midnight Lightning was scary for me. You know, not not trying as hard as I could at the top. I mean, certainly when I was trying by myself with no pads or spotter, I wasn't trying as hard as I could at the very top. And so, I don't think that's, I don't know, I necessarily think that is a good example. But no, I mean, the reason why I came up with these techniques, the reason why I came up with the showman, the reason why I came up with, having a climber, yell focus when I get to a certain move is because, I realized my weaknesses in certain points, things I needed to work on, things, and and in those cases, the people I had around me, the climbers that I had around me, the the people who believed in me, they all helped. They all helped, you know, help me get to where I could climb the things that I wanted to climb.
So, since landings were not a foregone conclusion of being good, you did not have a sea of pads underneath you. How do you balance that full commitment to try hard on the move, as well as kind of thinking about coming off in a way that allows you to land, or maybe it's not a dichotomy, and maybe what you really need to do for success is to completely commit to the move regardless of the landing. Did you ever struggle with that balance there?
Um, yes, yes. And earlier on, I mean, so let me say this: I've broken my ankles 9 times. I've had 3 knee surgeries, 2 ankle surgeries, shoulder surgery, and yeah, I've gotten injured. I've gotten injured, and well, the joke I make is, how do you break your ankles 9 times? And I said, because I didn't learn the first time, or any of the subsequent times. Um, but right, I mean, as anyone knows who has an injury, it's difficult to it can be difficult to get yourself back climbing hard again, and certainly back in the right mental space if you're, doing hard, scary things. And for me, I was able to get myself mentally to the point where I was just going for it. I could go for it high off the ground, and I wasn't too concerned about the landing or anything, and which is not the smartest way to be doing things. Certainly when you don't have the greatest pads or pads at all, but that's kind of what I did, and to kind of, I guess, think about think about that. And I guess because of that, the mentality I took to spotting was also very similar, because climbing I was willing to go, and you know injuring myself was kind of the price of what I was doing, or the price of trying as hard as I could, and sometimes it would happen. Um, for me, when I spotted somebody, if I said, "Hey, you want to spot?" or "Greg, will you spot me?" and we talked about it, or and I talked about what I was going to do, that was a contract. That was a contract. Like, you are putting your life and your body in my hands, and I am going to do everything I can to keep you safe. And if that means that I blow out my knee, which I did one time, or break my ankle, which I did one time, spotting somebody, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I've agreed with you, and to let you know that I'm going to try to keep you safe. And so actually, it irritates the crap out of me when I've watched spotting videos where people aren't really spotting very well, or people get to the lip and everyone walks away, and and when there's still moves that have to be done, people are yelling, "Oh yeah, good job, you sent," and you're like, "It's not over yet." And or worst case, someone going, "Okay, you're on your own now," which I've seen a bunch, and I'm like, "Wait, just when it's getting scary, I'm on my own? What do you mean?"
Greg, I've done that before. I did it to my poor wife on Sunshine Slab in Bishop. I said, "Okay, you're in the no fall zone. Like, you're good to go." I'm just, yeah. My Yeah. Well, I'll apologize to her. I'll tell her Greg told me to say sorry. My favorite is and this is why I don't ask for a lot of spotters. I only want one. Is everyone standing around with their hands up and the person falls between everyone. But
Yeah, I call that the volleyball spot.
yeah, yeah. I
The
just got.
volleyball. Oh, you got it. No, you got it.
I just gotta say it's really it's connected to what you're saying, where you commit 100% to the move, and yes, you might get injured, but it's nice to know that there's someone out there that's also committing with you on the ground and trying to make sure that you land as safely as possible. Which, yeah, it's really important to have that person in your crew that you look at and you say, you with me? And I gotta tell you, something that, just on this topic of things you may yell at people to help them. I even do this in sport climbing, to be honest, is I let people know. I say, like, I'm with you, wherever they are, just so that they have this reminder, like, I'm watching you,
Yeah,
not just
exactly.
an assumption that, like, hey, I hope someone gets me. It's like, my eyes are on you right now. I'm right there with you. And yeah, good advice, man.
I mean, the more experienced you are, the more you can just look at someone and go, "Oh yeah, that guy's sketching," or that they don't know what to do. They're getting tunnel vision, and so you see that, and you're like, I'm with you," and then like, oh, and you can see them visibly, the elbows come down or whatever.
I will tell you, Greg, that I don't want to say fired friends, but I will not spot certain people because I don't trust their intuition and their instincts, and they get off the deck in a situation I don't think they should necessarily be in, and they're prone to pitching off. And I'm not the biggest guy, and I'm not so sure that I want to try to catch a 175-pound dude coming from 20 feet where he shouldn't be. So, anyways,
Yeah, I wasn't. Well, typically I was climbing with these little. Uh, well, this is what I was calling them initially, which is scrom dogs. These little
that's me, Greg.
scrawny guys who
Yeah.
are little, who were skinny, and frankly, I was strong enough where I could usually catch people. And I never expected anyone to spot me that way. Actually, the best spotter I ever knew was Dean Potter. I don't know if you're familiar with who Dean Potter
Of
was.
course.
Best spotter I ever knew, and I'd climb with him a bunch. And one time I was in Yosemite with him, and we were doing something with 510. I can't remember. I was working at 510 at the time, and I'd gone up there just to kind of say hi to everybody. I just had knee surgery, one of my many knee surgeries, and Dean was like, "Why aren't you climbing?" And I was like, "I just had knee surgery like a week ago. I'm like, I can't climb." And he's like, "Dude, you're not going to touch the ground." And so I was off knee surgery. I wasn't able to climb or do any exercise before. I was over 2 bills. I was over 200 pounds because I had been, because again, my weight goes all over the place, and I was over 200 pounds, and I was like, really? Okay. And so I got on this climb, and I got like 3 feet off the ground, and I was like, okay, hold on, and I fell off, and he literally caught my butt like this. He goes, "Where do you want to be?" And sit me down, and I was like, okay, awesome. And so I started going up, and this is the climb where the crux is, your feet are maybe 6 feet off the ground, and I fell off a couple times, and he literally caught me in the air like that, and then just said, "Where do you want to go?" and would set me down.
Well, that's what it was
Yeah,
like.
no, it was.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah,
it was like getting spied by you. uh,
yeah, no, it was remarkable. It was remarkable. Yeah.
that's quite a bit of trust you put in Dean there. And by the way, I just got to tell you, 9 ankle surgeries or 9 ankle breaks is at least 7 too many, Greg. I feel like you can get 2 and be like, you know what, I don't want to break my ankle anymore. But I love that you were able to continue to access this mentality, to continue to show up and do your best and really put that stuff behind you. That's just incredible. And
You know what's interesting? I didn't start breaking my ankles until we started using crash pads. Because before crash pads, we knew how to land. We knew how to fall off of stuff and land, in rocky areas. And it wasn't until the crash pads where people trusted the crash pads a lot more. Where you'd get a gap in the crash pads, or you'd land right on the edge of the crash pad and snap your ankle. And anyway, that was
yeah.
interesting thing.
Mm. Yeah, it's I'd say that's the more common injury now. Is ankles are still broken all the time on Midnight Lightning, but usually it's they slip between a pad, they roll off the side.
Yeah.
So just PSA to everyone to check your pad placement every time.
Yeah. That's
Scoot
the
them back
climber
together.
and the spotter's job,
Yeah,
is to make sure that the landing is good before you go.
yeah, yeah. So Greg, you mentioned Dean Potter, you mentioned Ron Kauk, and you mentioned Patrick Edlinger, who I'm not so sure people will even know who he is, but look back to the Wolfgang,
Nowadays, no.
yeah, era. I mean, just incredible climber. Probably, you
Yeah.
would know the first descents he did back then, mainly sport climbing, and just kind of
Yeah, yeah. He
oh,
was known for being a sport climber.
wait, did he
Yeah.
do the FA of the Rose, or the vampire? God, I'm blanking on the name.
No, no, that was I can't remember. They're two brothers, the Lemenestrel
Oh
brothers.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Um, oh, but that trip I climbed with one of them. I think it was, which one was it? I don't remember which one it was,
we'll say
but
Mark.
it was the one who works at the business school there.
So,
I'm pretty sure it wasn't. Yeah.
you made your mark on climbing as well, and I'm just curious, climbing with all these people who now we really just think of as some of the greatest of all time. eh, What is
They're forgotten. I mean, a lot of these guys are forgotten too.
they're forgotten, but I think one of the ways they get forgotten is because there isn't as much, or there wasn't as much media, and you see their name in the
Hmm.
guidebook as like FA, Patrick Edlinger, and you go, huh, like back in 87, this guy climbed like this route, and you just think, in high tops, basically, uh,
Yeah,
and so,
yeah.
but hopefully we're telling these stories and bringing them a little bit to life, and not letting that completely disappear, because it's fun, like hearing that story of the evolution of something like Impossible Wall to Chinese Connection. Greg, you are unbelievably strong, but when people hear about the grade you climbed and then they hear that you did Midnight Lightning, they might be like, oh yeah, like Midnight Lightning V8. But hearing about what
Yeah. So what?
actually
Like
was like,
everyone does that now.
everyone, although I'll tell you what, you put anyone on Midnight Lightning, I don't care how hard they climb, there's a ability that is required, all sorts of different kinds of ability, finger strength, a mantle strength, and a mental
Hmm.
strength. So, but to me, that telling that story of what it was really like to do that, and not even considering the grades, it just shows, yeah, it just shows the experience of climbing, and the legends and the greatness that you guys typified from that era. But I want to understand, being around all of these amazing people, what what was the thread that you feel like tied them together? What helped them become great legends in our eyes?
So I guess this is the idea of what makes you good, the people who are good and the people who are great, right? One of the things, so I climbed with Chris Sharma for a while, certainly in his earlier days. But one of the things that really struck me about Chris is he wasn't necessarily the strongest guy that was climbing with us, right? There were some guys who were crazy strong, right, on crimps or whatever it might be. But what set him apart was his mental strength, his ability to remain focused, to kind of and I think people talk about this, like flipping a switch, right? Where you go around from like, oh, I'm just gonna, whatever, climb around, to all of a sudden there's some switch flip, and all of a sudden they're just like sending everything, right? And I remember seeing this with a bunch of the climbers. You can there's a switch you can flip where mentally you just they become very, very strong, where they believe in themselves, and where you can see they really believe in themselves. So when it comes down to, I guess, to commitment, and when it comes down to people who, I guess, the difference between the people who want to be good or want to be great and the people who are great is they make no excuses. They decide to make sacrifices. They make sacrifices, right? They quit their job. They leave school. They go live in the van, and or nowadays I don't know if people do that anymore, but back in the day, you quit your job, you left school, you got in your van, and you stayed at the crag, and you just got strong. You committed completely to that lifestyle, and You didn't let other distractions get in your way, and and for a lot of us, it made us very, very single minded, right? We're just climbers. We talk about climbing all the time. We get in arguments about ethics all the time, and then but we would then go out and send as hard as we could. Um, and I think that is probably the biggest thing that sets people up well. I mean, other than the mental aspects, is the is not allowing yourself to make excuses.
Damn, that's good. No excuses. I have always caught myself saying not even just excuses after the fact, sometimes before the fact. Sometimes I'll say, oh, I'm kind of like sore from yesterday, like my skin's a little thin. It's funny how you can even give yourself excuses beforehand. And I've
Oh yeah, oh
tried to
yeah.
really nip
You're
that.
excusing. You're setting yourself up for failure. You are allowing yourself to fail. And there's only one climber I know, one really, really great climber I know who can do that and still flip a switch, and that's Dave Graham. I don't know if you've ever climbed with Dave Graham, but I've never met anyone who complains more about their skin and about the humidity and about how weak they are and how their stomach's bothering them, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're doing V15. you know, like I've never met anyone who could do that.
Yeah, Dave's still doing V16, still to
Yeah,
this day. Yeah, it's something that I see often is I'll be climbing with someone who is incredible, and I'll be climbing with them, and I'll think, oh, they don't look so good on these moves, but really they're just kind of trying them out and kind of like learning them, and then all of a sudden they just do the climb. And I think you looked like you had no chance. If I was in your shoes, I would have lacked the confidence to think that I could put this together, but that wasn't the case. They were learning their beta and their technique, and then it was go time, and they executed. I love seeing that.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I've seen that. I mean, I guess this is me just continuing to drop names, but one time I was climbing with Ben Moon in an area that we developed in Black Mountain, this area called Black Mountain in Southern California, and there was a climb that I think it had one ascent, and it was one I'd been trying. It had a very low percentage move on it, and this is after Chris Sharma had come through, and he had put up a bunch of climbs, and a bunch of us had put up a bunch of fairly hard climbs, and we basically gave Ben Moon the tour. We're like, okay, this is the good climb, and he would get up, and he didn't look crazy strong at the time, but he would do it. He'd flash it, and I would look and go, okay, and then we'd get to another climb, and he would look at it and then flash it, and he wouldn't look the strongest, wouldn't look the most solid, but he would do it, and then throughout the day, occasionally he would fall, but then we got to that low percentage climb, and I'd been seeing him climb all day, and I'd been watching him get more and more kind of in the zone. And we got up there, and my boss at the time, this guy named Arnoud Tekint, who was, who was a famous Belgian climber, who was a very good climber. We went to that one last climb. It was a one move, low percentage move, and he says, "You know what? I think he's going to do this in 3 tries." And I said, "No, he's going to flash it." And it's because I just saw this progression, and he flashed it. And because I saw the way that his mentally, it seemed like he was getting stronger and stronger. Like he wasn't necessarily getting physically stronger, but he was just like he was getting more locked in. And anyway, it was really cool to see that. Um, I guess to see a kind of a continuation of that, but for sure that particular day really kind of reminded me of that the strength of the type of mental strength and focus that the best climbers have.
Oh, you don't remember the name of the climb, do you, by any chance? I just want to go try it out now.
Dark Horse.
Dark horse. Okay.
Dark
Okay.
Horse.
All right. I'll put it
Yeah.
on the
So
tick
yeah, because
list.
we were so the reason it got his name is we were all trying to climb, and this random English guy that was with us who wasn't really doing much all day, he did it, and we're like, oh my god, the Dark Horse did it. Yeah. So anyway,
Have you ever seen someone evolve in their time in their climbing career where perhaps they didn't have their mental game together, and then through different experiences they started, they learned how to flip the switch?
Um, so I would say I knew a few climbers like that. There was at the time there was dating this woman, and she had a 13-year-old nephew, and she said, you know what? I think he's athletic. I think he would be good at climbing. I think he'd be good at climbing, and but here's the thing. He's small. He's really small. His parents are short. I think his dad's like 5'2" or something like that, and his mom's shorter. And he's like he's not ever going to be very tall, but he's very very talented physically, and so anyway, and so I started. I would go to his middle school and I'd pick him up. And his name is Ben Polanco, and
I know Ben.
he yeah, Ben Polanco, and he started climbing, and almost immediately we were climbing, and he would give me excuses. I'm not tall enough. I'm not this enough. I'm not that enough. I won't be able to reach that. And so the approach I took with him was, because he was about the height of Lynn Hill. And I said, it's not that you're not tall enough. It's you're not strong enough. Just because someone tall can lock it off here and do the move. If you were stronger, you could lock it off down here and do the move. And so I watched him progress over the years from this, like, I'm not tall enough, making excuses, to all of a sudden, no, there were no excuses anymore. There was no excuses anymore. He just needed to get stronger, and he got himself stronger. And he developed his own really fluid kind of dynamic style, which I think, if we think about climbers nowadays, would be very similar to how Tomoa Nagasaki climbs, which is he's not a very tall guy, but he's very dynamic. He throws himself into the correct positions, right? I mean, where most other people are trying to static, he can throw himself into those positions. Yeah, Ben really progressed to the point where he was doing the same kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah, Ben's an incredible climber. I love watching him climb. He's got that flowy, dynamic style, that actually reminds me, because you started out as a boulderer, what what was technique like for you guys bouldering compared to sport climbing as you guys started pushing those grades? Bouldering is a very different, powerful type of sport, which you guys were kind of on the pioneering front of. Did you guys invent new techniques?
Yeah, I mean, we use techniques. We use techniques that we gave names to. So, for example, nowadays there's a move called the pogo, right, where you swing your leg in order to give yourself momentum to move your center of gravity up, right, to swing the weight of your body up in order to be able to reach a farther hold. And we were doing those moves in the early '90s. I mean, I called it the kung fu kick. You got to do a kung fu kick there in order to get your foot that high or whatever, to get your body to reach that hold. So we were doing moves like that. I remember when I first started climbing in a climbing gym, the big thing was DKT. Oh, there's this thing called DKT, drop knee technology. You gotta. There's this thing called a drop knee, and so we learned how to drop knee, and so we did ridiculously deep drop knees and blew out our knees and stuff, and yeah, I mean, and so
Oh,
yeah, I remember learning how to toe hook and hearing about this idea of hooking your toe on things. And anyway, yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of things like Chris and I, Sharma and I, we were bouldering one time, and we were trying to figure out this move that was really barn doory, and we're like, you know what? Let's do something called a pre-flag. So imagine you're holding an erect with your left hand and a crimp on the face, and you have like a smeary left hold on the erect and a right hold that's good, right? Backstepping. And as soon as you reach the lip, that right foot comes off and you swing out, right? You swing off, you barn door. And so we did what we called a pre-flag, which you would release the right leg, swing your entire body into space before you would let go of that hand, to where when you let go, you're not swinging, and then you would make the move. And for us, doing moves where you're generating, where you're not all four points on, was at the time kind of poo pooed. So yeah, I mean, there were a bunch of different things.
I want to hear when dynoing entered the equation because it just, you said not having all 4 points on was poo pooed. And that was just drilled into me when I was a kid was always have 3 points on, very static
Yeah.
climbing. And I remember for me, because, I was a little bit older when I found out about this, seeing Chris jumping, just jumping. And I thought it was just the coolest shit ever. So yeah, when did dynoing kind of enter your repertoire?
Oh, I started dynoing very early. Um, One of the things that I had to do, because when I started climbing again after the military, I was over 200 pounds and I was really heavy. My hands weren't that strong. So I had to climb fast because I couldn't hang on the wall for very long. Otherwise, I'd just pump out and fall off. And so I started climbing a lot faster. I started incorporating a lot more dynamic moves, and and there were a couple climbs at Indian Rock where there were dynos. There were some dynos, and so I started dynoing, and then of course in the gym I started dynoing a lot more. And I don't want to take full credit for this, but so I climbed at City Rock, which was one of the first climbing gyms around. Certainly, at the time, one of the most famous because we held the nationals there, or the national championships there, and we there were a couple times where we had boulder competitions, and the people would set the climb, and there was a starting hold, and then you were just supposed to climb up, and you finished on the top of the wall. Um, and I had been climbing there, and I learned I could, from almost like a couple feet off the ground, I could dyno to the top of the wall. And so the route setters very quickly figured out that we got to like designate where the finish hold is. Otherwise, Greg's just going to dyno. It's like, oh, I can finish anywhere. That was always my, oh, I can finish anywhere. Okay, I'm just going to dyno right here. Forget your traverse. I'm just going to go straight up. And
Oh man.
and so yeah, so they're like, okay, we're gonna put finish holds. We got to take finish holds. And so anyway, I thought that was a kind of a fun thing. But yeah, I mean, that was a lot of I was doing a lot of dynoing back then.
Well, I said early on when in the pod that you helped design the first dragon, but the thing that really stood out in my head is that you said, yeah, and I put a bunch of rubber on the heel because I wanted to heel hook and there weren't shoes that were made for it. So, yeah, can you just take us back to that era of heel hooking, but then not having shoes that were really geared towards it?
Well, so one of the really cool things when I worked at 510 was that in the design room, the almost every climbing shoe ever made was in that room, and had been cut open, and we had looked at what type of technology they used in order to make the shoe, the midsoles, the rand, I mean, everything, everything. And as I was looking through it, one of the most common things, and you'll still see this with shoes, is that typically the slingshot rand in the back where the heel is, there's a lot of tension, so it forces your foot forward, right, into the toe, where the tip. But what that does is it creates a air gap in the back, which makes it not ideal for heel hooking. Now, I mean, there were shoes that you could heel hook with before. I mean, there were slippers. I remember having moccasins and taping them onto my feet, right? I remember wearing Boreal Ninjas and having to tape it on so the heel wouldn't fall off and when I heel hooked. And but I mean, people. It's not like people weren't heel hooking, but I thought that uh, I could design a shoe, and because I was the one designing it, I could design a shoe for me that would work for the type of heel hooking I wanted to do, and the type of precision I wanted to have. And so I came up with the idea for the dragon, and the funny there was a funny story. The owner of the company, 510, he did most, if not all, of the design and shoe design, and he wasn't really keen on sharing design duties. And so I had asked him a couple times, and he's like, "Oh yeah, sometime in a year from now or something, we'll let you design." And one time, and I'd been going to the factory a bunch because I was managing production at the time. And uh, he and the main staff of 510 went to a big trade show in Germany, one of the big trade shows in Germany. And I knew I had about a week. And so I immediately went to the factory and I talked to the R&D guy, and I had drawn these pictures, and I said, "This is what I want to make." And he gave me a block of plastic, and he said, "Well, you got to carve it first." And so I got on the grinders and I carved the shape, exactly the shape I wanted, because they needed a shape. This is called a last. They needed a shape to build the upper, the leather, and all that other stuff on it. And then so I made the shape. I showed him my drawings, and then we spent the next week making a prototype. And then so when they came back, I was like, "Hey, I made a prototype. Check this out." And he looks at it and he goes, "Okay, keep working on it." And so yeah, I worked on it a whole bunch, and I came up with a bunch of different ideas. But the idea for the heel for me ended up not working very well in production. I didn't do a very good job of designing for production, so it ended up being a little looser than I wanted. But but um, but anyway, I designed a heel. I designed a heel that worked for me, and I was able to, you know, heel hook on tiny crimps and do all kinds of things, which was pretty fun.
Yeah, people loved that shoe, Greg. That was the shoe. And then the next evolution of it, which I don't think they make dragons anymore, unfortunately. But I climbed in the next evolution. I must have had gone through like 50 pairs. It was my shoe. It was the one. So what was the transition like into downturn shoes? Did you end up only using downturn shoes once they hit the scene, or did you struggle with climbing slabby top outs? Like, how did the downturn shoe change climbing for you?
So there were downturned shoes before. There were, but the only shoes that I thought were soft enough to really be able to pull um, tended to be slippers, right? Tended to be slippers, and slippers weren't downturned. But if you broke them in enough, you could kind of wrap your toes on stuff and pull. Um, and so I designed that specifically for heel hooking and for overhanging climbing. And I, I had what I called the quiver, right? So I would have a pair of dragons, which are my downturn shoes. I would have a pair of Anasazi Velcros, which were my edging slab shoes, or vertical, slightly less overhanging shoes. And then I had my Anasazi lace ups, the pinkies, which I called my cheating shoes, because if it was vertical or slab and I took those out, then it was over. Then I could stand on everything.
I loved the pink
But
Anasazi
yeah,
lace
but
ups.
they were so, but the midsole is so thick that it's not very sensitive, and so it wasn't ideal for all the types of climbing I wanted to do. So yeah, I typically carried three different shoes. I had the luxury of being able to carry three different shoes.
Those three are just perfect. I loved the Anasazi lace ups. They were like my go to. I don't know. I just thought they were the coolest shoes, despite them being hot pink. Well, they weren't hot pink; they were just pink. Okay, so I know
Yeah,
there were downturn shoes before that, because I remember when the Boreal Stinger came out, which was kind of like that really aggressive
yeah,
thing.
yeah. It was curved. It was curved too. And then La Sportiva had a shoe also that was even more curved, but was, I think, more designed for competition. It wasn't very good for outdoor climbing,
Yeah,
if I remember
did
correctly.
that unlock stuff for you? I would think in Waco. Yeah, I'm just kind of when I was climbing as a kid around that era, I saw the downturn shoes as being a little bit strange and they felt uncomfortable. And so I never even touched them. I just kind of want to understand from someone who is on the cutting edge what that new shoe technology unlocked, if anything, for you.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it's a specialized shoe. I mean, the way we thought about it, was that the high end shoes like the Dragon, or I mean, I don't even know what the shoes are nowadays, but those are the shoes that will get people's attention. Those are the shoes that'll get people in the store. But what people end up buying are the more mainstream, flat, like slightly more comfortable, right? Because when I designed the Dragon, I did not design it to be comfortable because I didn't care. I wanted it to perform. And one of the things, it definitely allowed me to stand and pull in on holds that I couldn't stand and pull in on before. It's on overhangs. Actually, I have a funny story when um, I was wearing Boreals for quite a while when I first was doing Midnight Lightning, and my feet always came off when I matched the lightning bolt. I could never ever match the lightning bolt and have my feet stay on, or have my feet stay on when I went to the lightning bolt. I mean basically couldn't keep my feet on, and I met so I ended up getting sponsored by 510, and the first thing I got a pair of guide tennies, these approach shoes, and the rubber was so sticky and so different that I said, you know what, hold on. And I did Midnight Lightning, and I got up to the lightning bolt, and my feet stayed on. And I did the whole climb wearing the guide tennies. Entire time my feet stayed on, and I was like, "Whoa, this is crazy!" And yeah, I mean, just that difference between the rubber that Boreal was using and the rubber that 510 was using was that much of a difference. I mean, I went with approach shoes and did the climb and kept my feet on when I couldn't do it with the climbing shoes. So,
I challenge anyone listening today with all the new technology to keep their right foot on when they go to the lightning bolt. I think that's a good test of, I think it kind of showcases some of the changes we've seen in climbing where people get so strong and have really strong fingers and they will do that move, but doing that move while keeping your right foot on really shows a level of tension and ability to put weight on your feet through a dynamic movement that is still rare, man.
it's also ankle position, right? It's being able to rotate your ankle out in order to fully utilize that hold. But yeah,
Interesting. Yeah. Well, before I let you go, I gotta ask I gotta ask about the X Games. I remember when climbing was in the X Games, and we thought it was the coolest shit in the world. And so you got to compete in the X Games. What was that like? That was when I felt like climbing was starting to become really cool. Yeah. What was that like?
yeah. Um, it was fun. I'd never been, I'd been to World Cups before, and actually I went to a World Cup in Arco, Italy, the Arco Rockmaster, where they got us hotels, they did all kinds of stuff. They gave us a stack of cash, and they did a bunch of stuff. But the going to the X Games was a different type of experience, because they had so many sponsors. They would just give you a massive bag. They gave us a massive bag full of crap, like full of jeans and jackets, and I mean I don't even remember what all the stuff. I don't even remember Oakley sunglasses, and I'd never been to a place where they did that kind of thing. They just gave you all that stuff, and we were, we were athletes, and we were certainly not premier athletes there, but we got the benefits of the premier athletes. So Tony Hawk was skating a lot back when I was in the X Games, and so we could go into the athlete area with the skateboarders, and so we would go back there and hang out with the skateboarders, and then watch them skate, or the BMX guys, or like because we're like, oh, climbing's boring, but I'm gonna go check out the skateboarders. I'm gonna go check out the BMX guys, and we hung out with we were able to go over there and hang out with those guys, and so that was that just that aspect of the X Games, this whole like extreme sport. This was what we considered the extreme sport Olympics at the time. That for us was a really big deal, and I was there to speed climb, and I mean it was fun, and I remember, because I had never been in competitions that were televised before, and so I remember having conversations with people and talking about the difference between having television cameras in your face and not, and thinking about whether or not we wanted to act differently, whether or not the stuff we wanted to say, if we wanted to have sound bites that they could use for commercials, and so it was a whole different aspect that we had to consider and think about. um, that you wouldn't normally at a normal competition, right?
Yeah, when I entered climbing after you, climbing was just such a small little tiny niche that no one really knew about, and we would joke, people would ask us what we did for fun, and it's like, oh, I climb 10-foot high pieces of plywood. Like that's what we do, and sometimes we get to go
Yeah,
outside and do 10-foot high pieces of rock. And so when you all went to the X Games, it just made it just it I don't want to say it legitimized the sport, it just made it feel cool, like being next to the in the same conversation as someone like Tony Hawk or people doing crazy backflips on BMXs. It meant a lot to me as a kid that I was like, oh, what I'm doing is badass. Because I'll tell you what, you get off the deck on something like Midnight Lightning, you think like, this is badass. Yeah, this is scary. This is exciting. And so I just think that's a cool thing that you got to do there, and usher in that new era.
talking about Midnight Lightning one time. I remember I was doing Midnight Lightning again, no pads, and by myself. And I remember a family walked by. They were just walking through, and I think I was like reaching to the lip or something like that, and I'd already done the lightning move, and I heard the dad go, "Hey, look, honey, he's practicing for real climbing." I was like, "Yeah,
Oh,
I
ouch.
guess."
Ouch. That
Yeah,
hurts.
no, I thought that was a funny perspective on it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, and that was frankly the perspective of a lot of actual climbers too.
well,
Yeah, all I was doing was like I wasn't doing real climbing.
well, Greg. Now I feel like the tables have turned entirely, and it's bouldering is the cool thing, and I like sport climbing. I really do. But I remember making jokes around my buddies who were doing more trad climbing. They're up on El Cap, and I remember saying like, "You guys just swinging around on ropes up there? What the hell are you even doing? Like, who cares? Like, let's get down here and climb some hard shit and get off the deck and get scared. And of course, I don't know what I'm talking about, but just it's funny to hear how it's gone. It's done a 180.
Yeah, no, I mean, track climbing is now the more adventurous. It was always kind of adventurous, but yeah, it's more of the fringe thing,
It's the fringe.
right?
It's the
Or free soloing.
counterculture.
Well, yeah, yeah, exactly. Free soloing, free soloing. Yeah, you can never free solo for too long. But I guess, yeah, I guess to swing back around to what we were talking about, I guess with the kind of whole mental aspect and overcoming different mental barriers. I went through a period of free soloing as well, where I learned how to push myself, and learned how to overcome fears and learn how to stay calm in situations where the vast majority of people would not be able to stay calm. And that was very, at the time, it was very attractive to me. And then it got to the point where I got less out of it than, or what I was getting out of it wasn't worth the danger I was putting myself in.
Yeah, in hindsight, those lessons that you learned, how do they apply to you being so removed from it? Like, you look back at that, and you're proud of the journey you went through and coming out of it, or yeah, how does it feel in hindsight to think about that?
What's funny is so Alex Honnold. I almost said that kid Alex Honnold, because I still think of him as like this new school kid. Um, but I remember watching videos of him climbing, right, free soloing, and the first thing I thought of was, man, that's so irresponsible. Which is like, it's really a funny. It was really a funny like old person thing to say, considering that granted, I was never doing anything on as difficult as he was doing, but like for example, at Lover's Leap, I free soloed most of those things there, and they're multi-pitch climbs, but not terribly hard. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, okay, I'm totally in control the whole time. It's not a big deal, right? Unless I get some freak weather or a rock falls on me or something, like I'm not really in that much danger. But yeah, in terms of what I think about it now, I guess it was part of the journey. It was part of the way I tested myself. Um, and to see what I could do and to find my limits. Because I guess you don't know what your limits are. You don't know how far you can take things until you find where the edge is. And so I worked on finding where the edge was.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this before on our last call, where you just don't really know what you're like until you're in the thick of it, whatever that thick of it may be. We're talking about climbing, and I think I think it's why, in my memory of that era, way less so than today, free soloing was often done by quite a bit of people, even if they were interested in super hard climbing. It seemed to go hand in hand. Like I was thinking, Dan Osmond was a big, a larger than life figure in my childhood because I was a big cave rock climber, which he really was pioneer and developed. Just some local crag here in the Tahoe area, and he was.
Oh yeah, no, no, yeah, no. You know what? I never met him, but yeah, I knew people who knew him,
Yeah,
who were friends with him.
but it just seemed like it was part of the thing. You're pushing yourself on all facets: strength, endurance, mental fortitude, how you act under fear. And yeah, I'm not encouraging everyone out there to go and do a bunch of free soloing, but it sure seemed like it's part of the journey. Yeah, definitely not encouraging. I hope my kids aren't listening. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that actually has changed quite a bit with climbing is you would see guys like Dean or Dan Osmond. I mean, there are a number of guys like that. I can't speak to Alex because I don't know him very well, or sorry, I don't know him at all. I only know of him. Um, but at least when we were going out, and the guys that I knew, um, we were oftentimes we were oftentimes like not the most well-adjusted people. I spent the most time out on the road right after I'd gotten back from the Persian Gulf War, where I was just like, I can't deal with society. I'm going to go live on the road for a while, which is the way I understand it now. At the time, I wasn't like I'm running away from stuff, but trying to figure out where I am mentally. But the people I met on the road, all the people I made friends with, those types of things, like the real regulars on the road, the ones who were never ever went, never did anything beyond living in their vans and stuff, and all we did was climb. Yeah, I mean, we all had stuff we were trying to deal with, and so when I see someone like Dan Osmond, that's typically what strikes me the most is that not so much that he was doing all these crazy things, but he was doing these crazy things for a reason, right? That didn't have anything to do with climbing.
Yeah, something that I realized somewhere along the way of my journey into climbing history is that a lot of these famous free soloists often pass away doing something not free soloing. It just clicked to me where I thought, wow, there's something more going on here than just their love of climbing. There's a playing with danger and the human experience that is clearly beyond climbing because they'll pass away in motorcycle accidents or whatever, wingsuit, whatever the case may
Or
be.
base jumping,
Base jumping.
wingsuit. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've had a bunch of friends die. It's die like that. It's yeah, it's sad. It's
Yeah.
sad.
Rest in peace to all. There's a bunch of people who I would have loved to have brought on here, but they're no longer with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, I lost my train of thought. I was as I thought about some of those great people who.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's interesting. It's something that I think is always interesting to explore and hear from someone like you who now I don't know you are well adjusted and that whole life on the road. People I think sometimes hear about what climbing was like and don't understand the kind of very small kind of counterculture, I would say too, of what it was like being out in the desert with no one. We go to Bishop now and there's a million cars and they're all Range Rovers, and it was very different a long time ago. It's just kind of fun to hear about what it was like being out in the desert climbing on rocks when people thought being out in the desert and climbing on rocks was crazy.
Oh, yeah. No, we and most of us were dirt poor. I remember we did this thing in Waco called lot life, and so on our days off, we would just hang out in the parking lot and do things like, well, I mean, there was the Drunk Olympics where there were these can't remember, Norwegians maybe, who had like bought a car. They they had come to Waco, they bought a car, and then when they left, they just left the car. And so we did all kinds of things to that. We did all kinds of things to that car. And one of the things we did the drunk Olympics, which was you left the car off. You just put it in neutral, so the car wasn't actually on. And the drunk blindfolded person would get behind the wheel, and then the drunk other drunk people would push the car from the back and yell directions. And you had to go through an obstacle course. It was, yeah. I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, that was just only one of the events.
Peak performance, Greg. Just really optimizing on those rest days. Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Uh,
But yeah, we did a whole bunch of stuff like that. I can't imagine. I have a hard time imagining the sprinter van crowd sipping espressos doing that.
I gotta tell you,
Doing a lot life.
I've done both, and sipping espresso in your nice warm Sprinter van isn't so bad, Greg. Just gotta tell you.
Oh no, I have an ambulance now. I have a tricked out ambulance that that my whole family fits in. Yeah, no, I love it now.
Joel Rusher argued that part of what allowed him to really get into that place we were talking about mentally before, he needed to sleep in the dirt, to be a little too cold, to really enter into this mindset of I'm tough and I'm going to do my best. I'm going to really show up in that way that we were just talking about. So yeah, Joel, I don't think he does have the Sprinter van. I think he's still trying to rough it.
Really? I mean, that's interesting. Of course, he did buy a house up in Kirkwood, didn't he? Right near the boulders.
Well, that's another way you do it. Yeah, when you have kids, things change.
Yeah.
Well.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. He's got two, right?
Yeah. Yeah, two, and that's, let me tell you, that takes that makes all bouldering quite a bit more difficult. Adds at least a few fee grades.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, thank you for all you've done for climbing. Thanks for sharing your story and all the other stories. And I just, you were, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, I never thought I would be here 30 years later talking to you. And I don't think you thought you would be here 30 years later talking to some little kid who was running around at Mortar Rock looking up to you. So thanks for coming on, man.
That's fun. Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, I forgot to ask you, even though we did a bunch of them, if you do want to give us a pro tip, sum up your 52 years of life and 35 odd years of climbing, and just to one perfect little thing that solves everyone's problems. Have at it.
I guess do not let the limitations of others control what you do. That's it. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but that was one of the things that I kept seeing happening, and people who kept saying I couldn't. There's no way anyone can do that. There's no way you can do that, and I would go off and not listen and just do my own thing, and more often than not, I would succeed, which was a great thing. Yeah. So yeah, do not accept the limitations that other people place on you.
Greg, I think that message is more important and even harder to implement now than before, because all we see is media of people doing things and doing climbs and doing them a certain way. And I've talked about this before, where sometimes I'll see someone do a move and it'll look hard for them, and then somehow I'll fall off of it because it looked hard for someone, even though that had nothing to do with my ability. And then I come back to it without those thoughts, and it's easy for me. I just think, what am I doing? Like, I need to climb. I need to be on my own, not let the others' limitations infect my experience. So great advice, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I hope you get back on the boulder soon, and don't break your ankle for a 10th time. And
I will make no promises.
And yeah, that pro tip, really, really good for me. And the other one that I just kind of pulled this out of when we were talking before, it's along the same lines, but it's this: don't fail because of your belief. Like anything but because of your belief. I just wrote that down when you said that, because it just really stuck in my head as something that is good advice for whatever era of climb you might find yourself in, even if it's 100 years from now.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, the grades change, the what people think of as being possible changes, but how one gets themselves to do those things, I think there's a lot of similarities in the different eras.
Thanks, man. Good stuff.
Yeah,
Take care. Really appreciate it again. Thanks, Greg.
yeah, of course. Thanks, man.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content